Okay, so ready to dive in. Today we're going to tackle some pretty heavy stuff.
Let's do it.
Moral theology, sex, and the whole question of what it means to be human.
Yeah. Big questions.
Huge. And we're looking at it all through the lens of two pretty influential thinkers.
Wojtyła, who later, of course, became Pope John Paul II.
Right.
And the giant himself, Thomas Aquinas, particularly what he lays out in the Summa Theology.
Exactly. So we're not aiming for a full-blown theology course here, right?
Definitely not.
This is more like a crash course or maybe even like a cheat sheet.
Cheat sheet, I like that.
Yeah, to help us grasp some of the core ideas these thinkers wrestled with.
You know, ideas about who we are, how we should live.
The big picture.
The big picture, yeah. And particulars for this deep dive, how our understanding of morality and sexuality intertwine.
So let's unpack it all.
Okay, well, first things first. If we really want to get where both Aquinas and Wojtyła are coming from, we kind of have to understand the intellectual worlds they were living in.
Right, the context.
Exactly. So Aquinas, back in the 13th century,
Okay.
universities were exploding, Aristotle's philosophy was making a comeback, and the church was getting serious about systematizing, its laws and teachings.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, think about the Fourth Lateran Council.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big deal for all sorts of things.
It's huge, yeah.
Including, making confession more regular. So did that create a need for more, like, specific moral guidance? Especially for the priests hearing those confessions.
Exactly. Think of guys like Raymond of Peñafort.
Okay.
Really key in trying to, organize and apply all these developments in canon law.
Gotcha. So, centuries roll by, and then we get to Wojtyła in the 20th century.
Now, his intellectual landscape is totally shaped by neo-scholasticism, and particularly this movement called Neo-Thomism.
Thomism, okay.
And this was, it was really a response to the Enlightenment and all its emphasis on reason and individual autonomy.
So, like, pushing back against this idea that it's all relative.
Right. They were like, no. There are objective moral truths.
Gotcha.
And within this whole neo-Thomist world, you get this really strong manualist tradition in moral theology.
Manualist. Okay, what's that?
Like, imagine handbooks for priests.
Okay.
They often focused on the external actions.
Okay.
Like, what did someone do? And the physical aspects of things to figure out if something was right or wrong.
So very much focused on, like, the act itself.
Very much so.
Less so, like, the intention behind it or the circumstances.
Yeah. And figures like Juan Izor, they were really influential in shaping how these manuals were structured.
Okay.
Often following, the Ten Commandments, the sacraments, that sort of layout.
So it sounds kind of like checking off boxes. Like, did you do this? Did you do that? Not so much about the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And actually, some people criticize this manualist approach, saying it missed some key elements of the Christian life.
Like what?
Like the idea of beatitude, our ultimate happiness, the role of grace, and the work of the Holy Spirit.
So it was kind of like, missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, kind of. But it's important to remember that even within Neo-Thomism itself, there was this push for a deeper understanding of, what Aquinas himself actually wrote. Guys like Joseph Cleichen were really key in that.
So there were different currents even within Neo-Thomism.
Oh, yeah.
Not just this one, narrow way of looking at things.
Not at all. It was a much richer intellectual landscape than sometimes people give it credit for.
Gotcha. So, bringing it closer to Wojtyła's time, the mid-20th century throws a whole new wrench in the works.
Oh, for sure. The whole debate around contraception.
Oh, huge, yeah.
The pill comes along, and it really challenges the existing moral frameworks.
Right.
You've got these intense discussions within the church.
Absolutely.
And even before that, Pope Pius XII starts addressing these questions, making a distinction between, using medicine for healing and using it to prevent conception.
Right. So Wojtyła is stepping into this whole, intellectual whirlwind.
He is, yeah. And it's in this context that he starts to form his own unique personalist perspective.
Okay, so let's get into that.
Yes.
How does Wojtyła's own journey as a thinker shape his moral theology?
Well, Wojtyła was, he was a philosopher through and through. His doctorate, it focused on St. John of the Cross.
Okay.
And his goal was to show that mystical experience, that direct encounter with God.
Right.
And the intellectual understanding of faith, they weren't at odds.
Interesting.
He saw them as two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
experience enriching our intellectual grasp.
So faith isn't just about like, cold, hard doctrine.
Exactly.
It's also about this lived encounter with something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And you see this focus on experience carry through to his next big project, his habilitation thesis.
Okay.
He takes on the ethics of Max Scheler,
Max Scheler, okay.
who was a really key figure in phenomenology, which is basically a way of studying things by looking at our direct experience of them.
Right.
And Scheler, he stressed the importance of these lived experiences for understanding values.
Okay.
Now, Wojtyła agreed with Scheler on the importance of experience, but there's this crucial point where they disagree.
What's that?
Wojtyła thought Scheler didn't fully account for our experience of wanting and choosing.
So like the actual experience of making a decision.
Yes. He felt Scheler missed that inner sense of, I want to do this or I should do that.
Right, right. It's like, hold on, we experience our will in action.
Exactly. We don't just think about things. We actually feel ourselves choosing.
And that's got to be part of any good ethical framework, right?
So for Wojtyła, absolutely. He kept developing these ideas in his lectures in Lublin. He even brought in insights from modern psychology about how we experience our choices. And all this groundwork, it eventually led to his two big philosophical works.
Okay.
Love and Responsibility and The Acting Person. These are the books where he lays out his personalist philosophy.
Okay, so let's talk about personalism then.
Sure.
If you had to, like, sum it up, what's at the heart of Wojtysza's personalism?
Well, for him, the person, the individual, is this unique being with an inner self. And what defines this inner self is reason. Our ability to know things and our desire for the good, they come together spiritually within each person.
Okay.
And this leads to what he called the personalistic norm, a fundamental ethical principle.
Which is?
Never treat a person merely as a means to an end.
So, like, don't use people.
Exactly. Every person has this inherent dignity and should be treated as an end in themselves.
That's a powerful idea.
It is.
Okay, so how does this apply to sexuality?
Well, he saw the attraction between men and women as rooted in their complementarity.
Right, makes sense.
But he argued that real love goes beyond just that physical attraction. It demands a totally committed and fully responsible attitude towards the other person.
It makes you think about all those relationships where it's just about, using the other person, not really seeing them for who they are.
Yeah, if you're just using someone for your own pleasure, you're treating them as a means to an end.
And that violates the personalistic norm.
Exactly.
So where does chastity fit into all of this?
Chastity, for Wojtyła, isn't about just saying no to sex.
Okay.
It's about recognizing the inherent value of the person in every situation. It's the virtue that raises to the personal level all reactions to the value of the body and sex. It's about integrating our physical and emotional responses with our reason and a deep respect for the other person's dignity.
So it's more about saying yes to the whole person.
Exactly.
Not just suppressing our desires.
Right. And it's in this light that he looked at Humani Vitae.
That encyclical on contraception.
Exactly. He really emphasized the connection between conjugal love and responsible parenthood, arguing that trying to separate those two goes against the dignity of the person and the true meaning of the marital act.
Okay.
It's about that total self-giving which respects the inherent ends of the sexual act.
So is this like the foundation for his theology of the body?
It really is.
Yeah.
In his Theology of the Body catechesis, which actually grew out of his earlier manuscript, Man and Woman, He Created Them, Wojtyła dives deep, really systematically, into these themes of personalism as they relate to sexuality.
And it is a deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
Like, theology of the body it's dense.
It is.
Yeah.
But if you look at the original chapter headings, especially in the newer translations, you can see how logically he's approaching this whole topic.
Right.
It's really quite systematic.
So one of the key ideas that comes up in theology of the body is this concept of original solitude, right?
Yeah. Wojtyła goes back to the Genesis account, focuses on man's state before Eve.
Okay.
And he says this original solitude shows us something fundamental about being human.
What's that?
Our unique individuality and this innate search for meaning and identity in relation to God.
So it's about recognizing ourselves as distinct beings, capable of self-awareness and relationship.
Exactly. We're not just absorbed into the collective.
Right, right.
And then this leads to the idea of the spousal meaning of the body.
Okay, unpack that one.
This is a big one. Wojtyła argues that the very design of the male and female body in their difference and complementarity.
Right.
It has this inherent capacity to express self-gift
Okay.
and the potential for communion.
Interesting.
The spousal meaning, it's like the body's way of pointing towards a loving reciprocal relationship.
So it's like the body itself has a language of love built in.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he believed we first experienced this meaning in a state of original innocence.
Before the fall.
Right. But, sin comes in and disrupts things.
Of course.
But he says through conscious choices, especially within marriage, we can reread this spousal meaning in the truth.
So it's like we can recover that original meaning.
Exactly. And when we act in line with this inherent meaning, our actions become an authentic language of the body.
Expressing genuine self-giving.
Yes. But when we go against it, it's like we're speaking a lie with our bodies.
Mm.
So, our actions, particularly in the sexual realm, they can either reflect or betray the deeper truth of who we are in our relationships.
Okay.
And Wojtyła, throughout Theology of the Body, he's always emphasizing this unity of the physical, the body, and the spiritual, the person.
Mm-hmm.
True self-gift involves the whole person,
Right.
including the communion of the body, lived out according to the Creator's design. It's not just about what we do with our bodies. It's
Right.
about the meaning and the intention behind our actions.
Okay, so that's Wojtyła. What about Aquinas? How does he approach all this in the Summa Theology?
So Aquinas, writing centuries earlier in a totally different intellectual context, had his own way of looking at human nature and personhood.
Okay.
For him, the soul, with its reason and will, that's where we find God's image in humanity.
So the emphasis is on our spiritual capacities.
Yes, exactly. Now, he did believe the body reflects God's goodness because it's created.
Okay.
But it wasn't the body itself that constituted the imago Dei.
Interesting.
So, and for Aquinas, our ability to think, to choose, that's key to our likeness to God.
Gotcha. So what about the differences between men and women?
Okay, well, on that one, Aquinas was heavily influenced by Aristotle's biology.
Which, looking back now, can seem a bit outdated.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he saw distinct roles for men and women, particularly within the family,
Okay.
with the man as the head and the woman managing domestic affairs.
But did he see men and women as fundamentally equal?
Yeah, that's important to remember because Aquinas also firmly believed that all humans are created in God's image
Right.
and that they have inherent dignity.
Hmm.
So while he was working within the social norms of his time,
Okay.
his theology actually provided a basis for fundamental human equality.
So socially defined roles, but a deeper spiritual equality.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, so what about passions, like, emotions and desires?
For Aquinas, passions weren't inherently good or bad in themselves.
Interesting.
They're natural responses, but their morality depends on whether they're guided by reason and will.
I see. So like anger, for example.
Exactly. It can be righteous anger, or it can lead to violence.
Right. It's not the feeling itself that's the problem.
Exactly. It's what we do with it.
Gotcha. What about original sin?
Well, Aquinas saw original sin as this disruption of humanity's relationship with God,
Okay.
and it leads to this internal disharmony.
Like things get out of whack inside of us.
Yeah, it weakens our ability to control our desires with our reason.
Okay, that makes sense. So how did Aquinas understand love?
For him, love is this movement of the will towards what we perceive as good,
Okay.
but it's rooted in our intellect. So it's an intellectual love, our rational faculty drawn towards what it sees as beneficial or valuable.
That makes sense, given his emphasis on reason.
And he saw our ultimate happiness, beatitude, as this activity of our intellect contemplating God.
God being the highest good.
Exactly.
And, we can't talk about Aquinas without talking about virtue, right?
Oh, absolutely. Virtue is central to his whole ethical framework.
So how did he understand virtue?
Well, he emphasized prudence, practical wisdom. It's like the charioteer of all the virtues.
Okay.
It's the ability to make good judgments in specific situations, to learn from experience, from the wisdom of others.
So prudence is kind of like the master virtue.
Yeah, you could say that. Now, temperance, for Aquinas, that was the virtue that moderates our desires for the pleasures of touch.
Okay.
Food, drink, sex. These are powerful desires, and they can distract us from our rational pursuits.
Right. So temperance is about finding balance.
Exactly. It's not about denying ourselves pleasure altogether. It's about ordering those pleasures rightly.
And chastity, where does that fit in?
Chastity, for Aquinas, it specifically orders our desire for sexual pleasure according to reason. And he even observed that the intensity of sexual pleasure can cloud our judgment during the act itself.
Wow, that's a really insightful observation.
It is,
Yeah,
and it's something that we still grapple with today.
absolutely. Okay, so what about marriage? How did Aquinas understand that?
Well, he saw the primary purpose of marriage as the generation and education of children.
Okay.
He viewed it as a natural institution, but one that Christ elevated to the level of a sacrament,
Okay.
emphasizing not just the procreative aspect, but also the spiritual union between the spouses.
So procreation and union.
Exactly. And he also talked about the marriage debt.
Marriage debt, what's that?
It's the idea that spouses have a mutual right and responsibility to engage in the conjugal act,
Okay.
primarily for the purpose of procreation. But when you look at other parts of his work, like the Summa Contra Gentiles,
Okay.
he talks about the sweet association that comes from the physical union of spouses.
Hmm.
So it seems he also recognized this relational good within marriage.
Even if it wasn't his primary focus in defining its essence.
Right.
Okay, so bringing it all together now, Wojtyła and Aquinas, how do their ideas about sex and the human person align? Where do they maybe diverge?
Well, it's clear that Wojtyła builds on Aquinas' understanding of the human person.
Right,
They both stress the role of reason, the importance of cultivating virtue.
right.
But Wojtyła, drawing from phenomenology, really brings in this emphasis on subjective experience
Mm-hmm.
and the relational meaning of the body.
Okay.
So it's like Wojtyła is taking Aquinas' foundation and exploring it through this lens of lived experience and interpersonal relationships.
So adding this layer of personal understanding.
Exactly. And, some scholars see Wojtyła's theology of the body as having deep roots in Thomistic thought.
Really?
Yeah, particularly in its understanding of the conjugal act
Okay.
and that inseparable connection between the unitive and procreative dimensions.
Right.
While Aquinas might have expressed it differently, that core idea is there.
That's fascinating. It shows how these ideas, these traditions, they evolve and build on each other over time.
Yeah, it's really amazing to see.
Okay, so wrapping it all up,
Mm.
what are the big takeaways from all of this? From Wojtyła and Aquinas.
Both of these thinkers offer us profound ways of understanding what it means to be human
Mm.
and the significance of our sexuality.
Okay.
Aquinas gives us this solid foundation rooted in reason, in natural law.
Right.
Wojtyła builds on that with this deep consideration of experience,
Yeah.
of the relational meaning of the body.
Okay.
But both of them call us to this integrated understanding of our human nature.
Where our desires and our reason are in harmony.
Exactly. And they remind us that our sexuality isn't just some biological drive.
Right.
It's this deeply human reality with moral and relational implications.
It's amazing how these ideas still resonate with us today.
They do.
They shape our understanding of ethics, of relationships, even the meaning of our bodies.
Absolutely.
And I think it leaves us with a big question to ponder.
What's that?
How do these perspectives, Aquinas, Wojtyła, how do they inform our own understanding of these things?
Yeah, it's a good question. How do we integrate these insights into our own lives?
It's something worth thinking about.
Definitely.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive for today. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll catch you next time for another exploration of some fascinating ideas.
Looking forward to it.
See you then.